A feared crime boss in a steel wheelchair. 40 years, no woman, no weakness. Then a broke maid walks into his fortress and says the unthinkable. I'll fix what they broke. I'll give you sons. He hires her under brutal rules. No pity, no touch, no lies. But the first spark hits in the rehab room. The second hits when bullets shatter his glass. Now enemies circle, and one of them wants what's hidden under his chair. She holds his gaze in the dark and says, "Trust me, or bleed for them." He is lethal to the world, gentle only for her. She is soft with him, steel with everyone else. Together they train at dawn, fight at midnight, and hide a promise that could rewrite both their lives. But a secret brother moves in the shadows. A trap opens at the water's edge. If she can heal his body and his fear, love might win a war. If not, they lose everything. So tell me, is her promise a miracle, or the one lie that will break the last good piece of him? The rain drummed against the hotel's penthouse windows as June methodically swept glass shards into a dustpan. Her movements were precise, unhurried despite the metallic scent of blood that hung in the air. Behind her, a young busboy's hands shook as he clutched a fresh stack of towels. "It's okay," she murmured, keeping her voice low and steady. "Just set those down by the door." The whisper of expensive wheels on carpet made her straighten, but she didn't startle. The man who entered commanded attention without saying a word. Impeccably tailored suit, silver-streaked dark hair, and a face marked by a scar that only emphasized his sharp features. His wheelchair moved with the same precision she'd used while cleaning, each motion calculated. Calder Viscari watched her work, his gray eyes missing nothing. June met his gaze briefly, then returned to her task, ensuring no fragments of glass remained hidden in the plush carpet. "Ms. Calloway," he said, his voice cool and measured. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years, Mr. Viscari." She disposed of the glass, then began addressing the bloodstains with practiced efficiency. "Your employment file is remarkably thin." June didn't pause in her work. "The clinic I previously worked at burned down. Records were lost." The busboy edged toward the door, but Calder's slight head tilt stopped him. "Stay." The single word carried undeniable authority. He turned back to June. "I have a proposition for you." She listened as he outlined the offer. Live-in position, private quarters, salary that made her eyes widen slightly. The NDA he mentioned was thicker than her current lease agreement. 2 men in dark suits entered, speaking in hushed tones about shipping containers and territorial disputes. June continued cleaning, her movements neither slowing nor speeding up as their conversation grew more heated. "The docks are becoming problematic," one muttered. 3 of our men. "Continue your work, Ms. Calloway," Calder instructed, watching her closely. June methodically finished mopping, her hands steady, as she wrung out the mop one final time. She returned the cleaning supplies to their proper places, then turned to face Calder. "What's your protocol for medical emergencies?" she asked. "And your backup generator coverage. Also, I assume there's a secondary exit route from each floor." A ghost of approval flickered across his face. That evening, the coastal manor loomed against storm clouds as Calder led her through the ground floor. The kitchen gleamed with professional-grade equipment. The laundry room hummed with industrial efficiency. Each space spoke of precision and purpose. "The safe room," he indicated, gesturing to a heavy door. "Keypad entry, reinforced steel." He handed her a keycard and a small device. "Panic button. Keep it on you at all times." The printed rules he gave her were equally clear. No pity, no closed doors, no touching without explicit permission. June read them carefully, committing each to memory. The shriek of an alarm cut through the air, 3 sharp blasts that meant sniper threat. Without hesitation, June moved behind Calder's chair. "Left turn ahead," he instructed calmly. "Code is 857-392. She pushed him forward, following his directions while memorizing each number. The safe room door hissed shut behind them, sealing them in concrete reinforced security. Hours later, with the all-clear given and the storm still raging outside, June sat in the manor's study. The leather couch that would be her bed for the next 2 nights was more comfortable than her apartment's mattress. Her overnight bag waited beside it, containing the bare essentials she'd packed with the same efficiency she applied to everything. The temporary NDA sat before her, the weight of its implications heavy in the air. Lightning illuminated the room as she signed, thunder following close behind. Calder watched from the doorway, his wheelchair positioned for a clear view of both June and the windows. "Be here at dawn," he said evenly before turning to leave. June watched him go, then began arranging her makeshift bed, mind already cataloging everything she'd observed. The manor's layout, the security measures, the way Calder's shoulders tensed slightly when turning his chair, all information she filed away carefully. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows as she settled in, alert despite her exhaustion. The study held the lingering scent of leather and old books with undertones of gunpowder that most wouldn't notice. June noticed everything: the slight wear on the carpet where Calder's chair regularly turned, the strategic placement of furniture that allowed for quick exits, the fact that every window had a clear sight line to defensible positions. She pulled out her small medical kit, checking its contents out of habit: gauze, antiseptic, pressure bandages, tools of her former trade that she still kept close. The thunder rolled again, and somewhere in the manor, she heard the quiet movement of security patrols. The next 48 hours would determine much. June smoothed her hand over the signed NDA, feeling the expensive paper under her fingers. The salary Calder offered could fund a small clinic. The risks were obvious. She'd cleaned up enough evidence of them today. But as another flash of lightning illuminated the room, June's hands remained steady. She'd made her decision the moment she'd pushed Calder's chair toward safety without hesitation. The storm raged on, but within the study's walls, June began organizing her supplies with the same methodical care she'd shown in the penthouse. Outside, rain washed away the day's violence, while inside, she prepared for whatever dawn would bring. The first hint of dawn hadn't yet touched the horizon when June stirred on the study's leather couch. A rhythmic thump echoed through the manor's halls, the sound of weights being lifted in steady repetition. She smoothed her wrinkle-free clothes, a habit from years of clinic work, and followed the noise. The manor's gym occupied a corner of the ground floor, its glass walls revealing the dark coastline beyond. Inside, Calder was secured in a standing frame, his body held upright by careful straps. Sweat glistened on his throat, jaw clenched as he gripped the parallel bars. Beside him, a red-faced physical therapist was gathering his equipment with sharp, angry movements. 2 years of training, and your boss won't listen to basic positioning advice, the therapist snapped, shoving items into his bag. I quit. Good luck finding someone else who'll put up with this. June watched the therapist storm out, then approached Calder with the same calm efficiency she'd shown in the penthouse. Without comment, she adjusted the cushion beneath him, relieving obvious pressure points. Her hands moved with clinical precision as she examined his chair's configuration. The seat tilt is off by 3 degrees, she noted, fingers ghosting over a friction rash on his hip. A segmented gel insert would prevent this irritation. The current one isn't distributing pressure correctly. Calder's expression remained impassive, but he reached for his phone. 2 swift messages later, her trial pay had doubled. He took the printed rule sheet from his desk and added a new line in precise handwriting. When she speaks about the chair, I listen. The day unfolded in a series of carefully timed routines. At noon, June observed the weapons inventory from her position organizing the laundry room. She implemented a color coding system for the crew's clothing: red tags for items needing special handling, blue for standard wash, yellow for delicate fabrics that might conceal weapons. The midnight accounts, she learned, were handled in Calder's study with his most trusted lieutenants. Between these fixed points, she moved through the manor with quiet purpose. In the gym, she set up a sterile cart with medical supplies, noting how the previous staff had left the space dangerously unprepared for emergencies. During an afternoon security drill, the crack of a test shot echoed across the grounds. A pane of glass spiderwebbed in the gym's wall. June was already moving, her hands finding the handles of Calder's chair, before the guards had fully registered the threat. She guided him to shelter with the same efficiency she'd shown during last night's alarm. Calder watched her with an unreadable expression, his eyes tracking her movements as she secured the area. The guards arrived moments later, their delayed response noted in silence. The kitchen crew welcomed her at their late dinner, sharing information about dietary preferences and meal schedules. June listened, mentally cataloging details about who ate when, which foods were restricted, how many place settings indicated a normal business day versus a meeting day. After dinner, she found Calder in his office, his neck tight from hours of work. Without speaking, she adjusted his headrest, preventing the pressure flare she recognized from years of clinical experience. Her movements were confident but respectful, maintaining professional distance while ensuring his comfort. The therapy schedule posted on the wall was conspicuously empty, a blank slate of missed opportunities. June studied it, mind already formulating a progressive routine that would maintain strength while preventing injury. She could see the potential for improvement, the ways to blend rehabilitation with the manor's security needs. Near midnight, the gym was dark except for security lights reflecting off the glass walls. Calder worked his shoulders methodically, the weights moving in controlled repetitions. June watched his form, noting compensatory movements that indicated fatigue. "If you let me change the routine," she said softly, careful not to disrupt his rhythm, "I can stop the skin breakdowns in a week." The weights continued their steady motion as she waited for his response. Outside, waves crashed against the cliffs below the manor, a constant reminder of their isolation. The glass walls reflected their images, Calder's focused determination, June's quiet certainty, and the vast darkness beyond. The gym's climate control hummed softly, maintaining the precise temperature that June had already identified as optimal for preventing overheating during workouts. She'd spent part of the afternoon adjusting it, along with the humidity levels that could affect grip strength on the equipment. Each detail she'd observed throughout the day, from the way Calder shifted his weight during meetings to the specific angle that caused his shoulders to tense, had been filed away with professional precision. The empty therapy schedule represented more than just missed appointments. It was a gap in the manor's otherwise meticulous operation. The weight machine's cables whispered with each controlled movement, a counterpoint to the distant sound of security patrols. June stood with perfect stillness, her presence neither intrusive nor hesitant. She'd found her place in the manor's rhythm, moving through its spaces with the same quiet competence that had caught Calder's attention in the penthouse. Her words hung in the air between them, neither a challenge nor a plea, but a simple statement of fact backed by years of clinical experience. The same steady hands that had cleaned blood from marble floors now offered to prevent wounds before they formed. Dawn crept over the coastal manor as June entered Calder's study, a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. The morning light cast long shadows across the polished floor, catching the silver wheels of his chair. She laid out her handwritten protocol with methodical precision, each page detailed with anatomical sketches and treatment schedules. "The nerve stimulation needs to follow mapped quadrants," she explained, pointing to her carefully drawn diagrams. "We'll start here, working in sections to retrain sensory pathways." Her finger traced the patterns she'd outlined. "Joint mobilization comes next, followed by hip retraining with proper bracing." Calder studied the documents with the same intensity he gave financial reports. His face remained impassive, but his fingers tightened on his armrests when she reached the section on recovery periods. "You're collapsing when you should be resting deliberately," June said, her voice professional but gentle. "Scheduled stillness, not exhaustion. There's a difference." She moved to the corner of the study where adaptive equipment gathered dust, running her finger along an unused standing frame. "These tools can help, but they need proper maintenance and consistent use." Then she turned to the final page, her heart beating steadily despite the weight of what she was about to address. "There's a significant gap in your current regimen," she said, meeting his eyes. "Nothing here addresses intimate sensation restoration." The mask he wore, the one of perfect control and distant authority, cracked slightly, his jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. "You're 40, June continued, her voice soft but unflinching. "You've never taken a woman to bed. The injury has merged control with fear, but it doesn't have to stay that way." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. June's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady as she made her vow. "Give me 6 months and I'll heal what can be healed. I will give you sons." Calder wheeled himself to his desk, movements precise and controlled. He pulled out legal papers, already prepared, as if he'd anticipated this moment. The contract was comprehensive, defining her role as live-in housekeeper and rehabilitation aide, granting her 24/7 access to the manor and its facilities. A debt clause spelled out severe consequences if she broke the agreement. "Have someone read it," he said, sliding the document across the desk. "Make sure you understand every word." June nodded and took the contract to the kitchen, where the manager, a former paralegal, reviewed each clause carefully. When she returned to the study, she signed her name while holding Calder's gaze, accepting the forced proximity and boundaries the agreement imposed. "One addition," she said, taking out her pen. "You will follow every therapeutic directive in the gym, without exception." He nodded once, sharply, and initialed the addendum. The afternoon found June in the manor's extensive linen storage, cataloging sheets and towels with the same attention to detail she'd shown in her medical protocols. As she worked, a lieutenant named Massimo entered, reaching past her for clean uniforms. His sleeve rode up, revealing a black sun tattoo spiraling across his forearm. June's breath caught. That same symbol had been photographed at the scene of the clinic fire that had destroyed her medical records and derailed her career. She kept her face neutral, continuing her inventory as if she hadn't noticed. The information filed itself away in her mind, a piece of a puzzle she wasn't ready to solve. The day passed in a blur of schedules and routines. June learned the manor's rhythms, when guards changed shifts, which doors were never left unlocked, how many minutes it took to reach the safe room from any point in the house. She memorized security protocols and staff rotations, building a mental map of the fortress she now called home. At 10 p.m., she wheeled Calder back to the gym for final stretches. The glass walls reflected their images against the dark sky beyond, creating a fishbowl effect that emphasized their isolation. She adjusted his position, fingers professional as she checked the belt tension across his legs. The contract lay signed in his study. Its weight felt even here in the gym. They both understood what it meant. 6 months of forced proximity, of intimate care, masked as professional duty, of boundaries that would be tested by necessity. The door to escape had closed with their signatures, leaving them locked in this careful dance of rehabilitation and unspoken possibilities. June's hands moved with practiced efficiency, adjusting straps and checking pressure points. Each touch was clinical, yet held the promise of her earlier vow. Calder watched her in the glass reflection, his face unreadable but his attention unwavering. The night pressed against the windows, emphasizing the bubble of light and purpose they occupied in the vast darkness. The gym equipment stood ready for tomorrow's session, already arranged according to June's new protocol. Her therapy cart waited in the corner, organized with the same precision she brought to every task. The empty schedule board now displayed a detailed plan, each hour mapped out with purpose and intent. Dawn painted the gym's glass walls in pale gold as June prepared for their first comprehensive session. The metronome sat ready on a steel cart, along with neatly arranged electrodes and conductive gel. She'd arrived 15 minutes early to check every piece of equipment, her movements precise and purposeful. Calder entered precisely at 6, his chair's wheels silent on the polished floor. He wore fitted athletic wear that would allow easy access to the targeted muscle groups. June noticed his jaw was already set with tension, but his eyes held steady determination. "I'll explain everything before we begin," June said, her voice calm and clinical. The standing frame first, then electrical stimulation of the adductors and lower abdominal muscles. She demonstrated the electrode placement on her own leg. "Each touch will be announced, no surprises." He nodded once, wheelchair locked into position beside the frame. June guided him through the transfer with clear, direct instructions. Left hand to the grip bar, right hand to the frame. "I'm supporting your trunk now." Her movements were smooth, practiced, nothing like the fumbling of previous therapists. Within minutes, she had him secured in the standing frame, straps properly tensioned to prevent skin damage. "The first electrode goes here," she said, touching a point on the frame corresponding to where she'd place it on his leg. "You'll feel a cool sensation from the gel, then the adhesive." She worked methodically, narrating each action while attaching the sensors to mapped points along his muscles. The metronome began its steady beat. "Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 2, release for 4, June instructed, adjusting the stimulation intensity. "The contractions will follow this rhythm. Tell me if you need adjustments." Over breakfast, June unveiled her new organization system. Color-coded bands appeared on every piece of equipment. Green for ready to use, yellow for needs sanitizing, red for requires repair. The gym transformed hour by hour, clinical efficiency replacing the previous chaos. "This creates accountability," she explained to the cleaning staff. "No more guessing about equipment status." By lunch, the system was running smoothly, the gym looking more like a professional rehabilitation center than a private workout space. The afternoon brought transfer training. June positioned a sliding board between Calder's chair and a therapy table, demonstrating the proper angle to protect his shoulders and prevent skin tears on his hands. "Watch how I brace here," she showed the attending staff. "Shoulder impingement is our enemy. Every transfer must prioritize joint protection." Her hands remained professional, her touch precise and purposeful. During a routine skin check, June spotted early signs of pressure irritation. "Small flare on the left ischial area," she noted on her clipboard, efficiently cleaning and documenting the site. She recorded his blood pressure, temperature, and other vitals with the same attention to detail. "I'm doubling your compensation," Calder said after watching her work. June shook her head, not looking up from her. "Documentation. What I want is compliance with the schedule and respect for the protocol. Money won't improve outcomes. Cooperation will. The afternoon session brought an unexpected breakthrough. During electrical stimulation of the quadriceps, a muscle fiber responded with a definite twitch. June noticed immediately, her trained eye catching the slight movement. She stepped closer, hand hovering above his thigh. "I'd like to palpate the contraction. May I?" The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Calder's eyes met hers, searching for any hint of pity or inappropriate interest. He found only professional focus. "Yes," he said, voice slightly rough. June's fingers pressed precisely where the response had occurred, confirming the muscle activation with clinical detachment. "Good recruitment here," she noted, immediately recording the time and location. "We'll focus extra attention on this area tomorrow." The day's sessions continued with the same careful attention to detail. June maintained her steady narration of each action, building trust through transparency. Every movement was purposeful, every touch professional, creating a foundation of safety and respect. As 9 o'clock approached, June began their cool-down routine. The metronome's steady beat had become familiar background noise, marking the rhythm of their shared purpose. She methodically removed the electrodes, cleaning each site with practiced efficiency. 6 a.m. again, Calder said, his voice carrying a roughness that hadn't been there that morning. The words held both command and question. "Of course," June replied, her hand finding the authorized position on his chair's pushbar, a privilege earned through a day of demonstrated competence and respect for boundaries. They left the gym together, the glass walls now dark mirrors, reflecting their exit. The day's enforced intimacy had shifted something between them, creating a careful alliance built on professional trust and shared purpose. June's hand remained exactly where permitted on the chair, no more and no less, because he had granted that right through explicit consent. The Manor's evening silence enveloped them as they moved through the corridors, their path lit by security lights that cast long shadows. Each understood that tomorrow would bring another day of careful boundaries, professional touch, and the slow work of healing. June's clipboard held the day's measurements and observations, a clinical record of progress that said nothing of the trust being built with each documented touch. Sunlight streamed through the tall entry windows as June worked her way along the glass with sanitizing spray and microfiber cloth. The morning had been quiet. Too quiet, she'd realize later. The first warning came as shadows crossed the driveway. The crack of rifle fire shattered the peace. Glass exploded inward, raining razor-sharp shards across the marble foyer. A guard stumbled, crimson blooming on his sleeve where a bullet had grazed him. June's heart hammered, but her hands remained steady as she assessed the situation. Calder appeared at the corridor entrance, his wheelchair gliding silent as a shark. With surgical precision, he reached beneath the chair's frame and produced a matte black pistol. His voice cut through the chaos with arctic calm. "Martinez, west window! Chen, cover the door! June, get down!" She was already moving, staying low as she grabbed the injured guard's tactical vest and hauled him behind a thick marble column. More shots peppered the entrance, but Calder's return fire was methodical, each shot placed with devastating accuracy. He commanded the space like a conductor, directing his men's positions while systematically eliminating threats. "Contact down, east side," he called. "2 more, tree line." June pressed against the wounded guard's arm, stemming the blood flow while listening to the deadly orchestra Calder orchestrated. His chair pivoted smoothly as he tracked targets, never wasting a movement or bullet. Within minutes, the attack dissolved into retreat, leaving only breaking glass and copper-scented air. Later, under the kitchen's harsh fluorescent lights, June's hands trembled slightly as she cleaned dried blood from Calder's knuckles. The adrenaline crash left her lightheaded, but she focused on the familiar routine of wound care. "You handled yourself well," Calder said, his tone as measured as his breathing. "What protects me protects you now. You're part of this household." He spoke into his phone, voice clipped. "Double the guard rotation on the housekeeper wing, adjust camera coverage to include her door." June nodded, dabbing antiseptic on a small cut across his thumb. The morning's violence had shifted something fundamental between them. She was no longer just staff, but someone to be defended. Evening found them in the gym, June logging vital signs while monitoring Calder for delayed reaction to the morning's stress. His muscles showed signs of adrenaline-induced tension, threatening to trigger spasms if not addressed. "We'll modify tonight's session," she said, adjusting the stimulation settings. "Focus on preventing contracture. Match your breath to the current. In for 4, hold for 2, out for 4. She guided him through gentler exercises, her voice maintaining the steady rhythm that had become their shared language. The familiar routine helped ease the day's tension, though his shoulders remained tight with hypervigilance. During a stretch designed to release his hip flexors, June leaned close to check his alignment. For one suspended moment, their faces were inches apart, sharing the same air. She could see the subtle flecks of gray in his blue eyes, feel the warmth of his exhale. Time seemed to stop, the professional distance between them suddenly paper-thin. June stepped back deliberately, reinstating the clinical boundary with practiced ease. 3 more repetitions, she said, voice carefully neutral. Then we'll check your blood pressure again. The session continued with their usual precision, though something electric lingered in the air between them. As midnight approached, exhaustion finally overcame Calder's iron control. He dozed in the therapy chair, features softened by sleep. June moved quietly, covering him with a blanket from the warming cabinet. Her whisper was barely audible over the humming equipment. We will fix everything. The words held promise beyond muscle and nerve, a vow to heal whatever broken pieces lay beneath his careful control. The gym's glass walls reflected their tableau, the dangerous man at rest, the caregiver standing guard. Security cameras blinked steadily, recording the moment when professional distance blurred into something more complicated. Outside, armed men patrolled the perimeter, protecting this quiet scene of vulnerability. June recorded the day's final measurements, noting improved range despite the morning's stress. Her clinical notations said nothing about the way his hands had looked holding the pistol, or how his voice remained steady, even in combat. The incident report mentioned only relevant medical details: elevated heart rate, muscle tension, potential trauma response. She documented everything except the moment their breath mingled, when all the careful lines they'd drawn seemed to waver. The night settled around them like a blanket, security lights casting long shadows through the glass. In sleep, Calder's face showed none of the morning's deadly focus or evening's careful control. June's whispered promise hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken meanings. She maintained her watch, clipboard, ready to record any changes in vitals, any sign of distress. The day had transformed their careful, professional dance into something more complex: protector and protected, healer and patient, 2 people sharing the same dangerous space. Tomorrow would bring more boundaries to navigate, more careful distance to maintain. But for now, in the quiet gym, with its sleeping guardian and watchful caregiver, everything that needed fixing waited patiently for dawn. The pool's surface rippled with pre-dawn light as June adjusted the waterproof stimulation unit strapped to Calder's thigh. Steam rose from the heated water, creating a clinical haze in the glass-enclosed natatorium. She'd positioned him on the underwater bench, his chair waiting nearby like a sentinel. I'm going to brace your hips now, June announced, her voice carrying the same steady tone she always used during therapy. The water lapped at her shoulders as she positioned herself. We'll work on pelvic tilt against the buoyancy. The water temperature should help reduce muscle guarding. Calder's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as her hands found their positions. She'd learned to read the micro-expressions that betrayed his discomfort, the slight tension around his eyes, the controlled rhythm of his breathing. Timing the pulses with movement, she explained, activating the unit. Exhale and tilt on 3, 1, 2. On the 4th repetition, something changed. Calder's breath caught, his hands gripping the bench's edge. A flash of sensation, thin as a paper cut but undeniably real, traced along his inner thigh. June noticed the shift immediately. Years of clinical experience let her recognize the mixture of shock, arousal, and shame that crossed his features. His iron control wavered, vulnerability warring with his need to maintain distance. Step back, he ordered, voice rough. June held her position, gentle but immovable. The nerve signal needs consistent input. If I move now, we'll lose the connection. Her tone remained professional, though her heart hammered against her ribs. I know it's uncomfortable, but this is progress. Their eyes met in a silent battle of wills. June watched him wrestle with the urge to enforce distance, to protect himself from this raw moment of exposure. Finally, he gave a sharp nod, accepting the necessity of their proximity. The moment settled between them like sediment in still water. June continued the exercise, maintaining the careful rhythm that had sparked this breakthrough. Neither acknowledged the tension, letting it dissipate naturally as they focused on the therapeutic goal. Later that morning, June carried fresh towels to Calder's study. The room was empty, sunlight streaming through bulletproof windows onto the massive desk. A manila folder lay partially open, its contents slightly askew, unusual for someone as precise as Calder. She wasn't meant to see the papers within, but her eyes caught fragments as she arranged the towels. Medical diagrams, clinic letterheads, research papers on fertility treatments, and adaptive intimacy. The documents told a story of quiet desperation, a man searching for possibilities he'd convinced himself were forever closed. June restored the folder exactly as she'd found it, but the knowledge sat heavy in her chest. He'd been researching options, planning for a future he never believed he could have. The discovery added new weight to her promise about giving him sons. That evening, after their regular therapy session, June broached a delicate subject. "We need to discuss consent protocols," she said, adjusting equipment settings with practiced efficiency. "The contract puts us in constant close contact. We should have clear boundaries for any intimate situations that might develop." Calder's expression remained neutral, but his hands stilled on the chair's controls. "Explain." "I propose a system of explicit verbal consent for anything beyond therapeutic touch. Nothing accidental should become coercive because of our arrangement." She kept her tone professional, though her cheeks warmed. "We both need to feel secure in our boundaries." He considered this with the same intensity he applied to security reports. "Agreed, with one addition." His blue eyes met hers directly. "You have the power to stop any scene, therapeutic or otherwise, without consequences. Your no overrides the contract." The protection he offered with those words hung in the air between them. June nodded, recognition passing between them of the trust being built, layer by careful layer. The gym's evening quiet enveloped them as June logged the day's gains in her clinical notebook. The breakthrough in the pool warranted special notation, though she kept the language strictly professional. The consent discussion would stay between them, part of the growing collection of unspoken understandings. Calder appeared in the doorway as she finished her notes. The day's events had shifted something fundamental between them, the possibility of more hovering just beyond their carefully maintained boundaries. When he spoke her name, June, it carried the weight of a promise, though neither could yet define its terms. He wheeled away without waiting for response, leaving them both space to breathe around this new reality. The sound of his chair receded down the corridor, measured and steady, like everything else about him. June remained at her desk, pen hovering over the day's final entry. The return of sensation, however slight, marked a physiological victory. But the real progress lay in the moments of trust. His acceptance of vulnerability in the pool, her promise of boundaries, their shared acknowledgement of possibilities neither had dared voice before. The gym's glass walls reflected the evening sky, security lights creating pools of clarity in the gathering dusk. Beyond the perimeter, armed guards maintained their endless patrol. Within these fortified walls, something delicate was taking root, hope growing in the space between professional distance and intimate trust. June closed her notebook, tucking away the day's revelations like precious things. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new boundaries to navigate, but tonight, they'd taken steps toward a future that no longer seemed impossible. June's phone buzzed against her hip as she folded fresh sheets in the laundry room. An unknown number flashed on the screen, followed by an image that made her blood run cold. A close-up photo of Massimo's black sun tattoo, the same mark she'd seen in evidence photos from the clinic fire investigation. The next message appeared instantly. "Plant this tracker in Viscari's chair base plate, or police get proof you were there that night. You have 24 hours. A link followed, showing a tiny GPS device available for pickup at a nearby hardware store. June's hands trembled as she set down the phone. The clinic fire had destroyed more than medical records. It had incinerated her career prospects, her reputation, and any chance of a normal life. Now someone was using that nightmare to force her hand against Calder. She found Massimo in the service corridor, checking inventory sheets. Without preamble, she backed him against the wall. "The black sun, I know what it means, what it did." His face hardened. "You know nothing, girl. I know enough to take this to Calder unless you start talking." Her voice remained steady, despite her racing heart. Massimo's laugh was bitter. "You want truth? Ask about who really arranged the hit that put him in that chair. His own blood, Cesare Viscari, half-brother with a whole grudge." He leaned closer, voice dropping. "Same one who still moves money through shells that paid for your little clinic fire?" June's mind raced. She'd heard whispers about Cesare, the younger Viscari who'd disappeared overseas years ago. Now pieces were clicking into place, the offshore accounts, the convenient timing, the calculated strikes at Calder's vulnerabilities. She checked her phone. Calder was in a 2-hour security briefing. It gave her time to act. In the gym's storage room, June pulled up parts diagrams for Calder's chair model. She needed to examine the base plate without arousing suspicion to understand what the blackmailer wanted while having no intention of actually compromising Calder's safety. Her fingers traced the mechanisms she'd memorized during therapy sessions. The chair was an extension of him. Violating it would be an intimate betrayal. She couldn't plant a tracker, but she had to understand the threat. That evening over dinner in his study, June watched Calder review security reports while picking at his food. The weight of partial truth sat heavy in her stomach. "I need to tell you something," she said finally. "My past, the records that qualified me for rehabilitation work, they burned in a clinic fire. Someone connected to your world funded it." She met his eyes. "I suspect there's an inside man in your crew." Calder's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened on his fork. "Explain." "I recognized a tattoo, made connections. There's more, but I need to be certain before I say names." He set down his utensils with precise movements. "Massimo takes a week's leave, starting now, while I think." The words carried the weight of temporary exile. June watched him press a button on his chair's control panel. "Get me security tech! Full sweep of all chairs and vehicles at dawn." His voice was Arctic calm. "Someone's testing my walls!" The order rippled through the house. Guards doubled their patrols. Technicians prepped scanning equipment. June felt the tension rise like a tide. In her room, just before midnight, June lay awake, staring at her dark phone. The blackmailer's deadline loomed, but her choice was already made. She wouldn't betray Calder's trust. Still, the complexity of her position wasn't lost on her. Her silence could get someone killed. Massimo, if Calder decided he was a threat. But speaking too soon, without all the pieces, could shatter the delicate trust network Calder had built around himself. She traced the path of moonlight across her ceiling, cast by security floods, sweeping the grounds. The house hummed with heightened alertness. Every guard and camera focused on external threats, while internal loyalties twisted like snakes. June had stepped into this world knowing it operated on different rules. Now she was learning just how deep those complexities ran. Family turning against family, money flowing through shadow accounts, lives burned away as collateral damage. Her phone remained silent, but the threat pulsed like a second heartbeat. Somewhere out there, someone was counting on her fear of exposure to make her betray the man whose trust she'd worked so hard to earn. They didn't understand that her loyalty to Calder wasn't built on fear or contracts. It was founded in small moments of earned trust, his acceptance of her touch during therapy, his willingness to be vulnerable in the pool, the quiet strength it took to let someone close after years of isolation. The night deepened around her as she lay still, measuring breaths like she taught Calder during their sessions. Tomorrow would bring hard choices. Tonight she held the weight of dangerous knowledge and wondered how many more secrets this house contained. Security lights swept across her window in steady rhythm. Beyond her door, guards patrolled with measured steps. In his wing of the house, Calder would be reviewing camera feeds, planning contingencies, calculating risks. The machine of protection ground forward while underlying threats grew like roots in dark soil. The Tuesday morning sun painted golden streaks across the gym's polished floor as June guided Calder through their most intensive session yet. She'd arranged stations in a careful sequence, transfer mats positioned at precise angles, stability wedges in graduated sizes, and a collection of meticulously modified grips that mimicked weapon handles. Everything from pistol grips to knife handles, each crafted to rebuild his muscle memory without compromising safety. "We'll start with groundwork," she said, positioning the transfer board beside his wheelchair, her movements deliberate and practiced. "Then pool therapy to ease any muscle strain from the resistance training. I've adjusted the water temperature to better facilitate blood flow." Calder nodded, his focus razor sharp as he gripped the board's edge. His knuckles whitened slightly, betraying the effort behind his composed expression. June counted down with steady confidence, and together they executed a smooth transition from chair to mat. His shoulders tensed with controlled effort, muscles cording beneath his fitted black compression shirt, but his movements showed the unmistakable progress of their daily work, fluid where they had once been halting. "Good control through the transfer," June praised, her hands steadying his hips with clinical precision. "Now we'll work on rolling technique. Remember to lead with your shoulder, not your neck." They moved through the exercises with practiced rhythm, like dancers who'd rehearsed the same steps until they became second nature. June's hands remained professional but sure, guiding his body through each motion with the perfect balance of support and challenge. When they reached the weapons training station, she noticed how his fingers tightened around the modified grips with muscle memory that transcended his injury, the instinctive precision of a man whose survival had once depended on these skills. Your hand strength is improving consistently, she noted, recording the hold times in her tablet with meticulous care. Particularly in your non-dominant hand, the asymmetry is balancing out. Necessity, he replied, testing the trigger guard spacing with methodical attention. His eyes held a cold calculation as he assessed his own performance. Some skills can't afford to rust. Not in my position. The pool session came last, warm water embracing them as June supported Calder's weight. Here, in the weightlessness of the heated therapy pool, his movements gained a fraction more freedom, a glimpse of the fluid power he must have possessed before. She positioned herself behind him, hands steady on his hips as they worked through the motion patterns she'd designed to strengthen his core without straining his compromised spine. The night had happened, he said suddenly, his voice low enough that the gentle lapping of the water almost swallowed it. Cesare's intel said the warehouse was clean. His source confirmed it personally, said he'd walked the perimeter himself. Calder's jaw tightened, a micro-expression that spoke volumes about contained rage. June kept her breathing even, maintained the steady rhythm of their movement through the water. She felt the tension ripple through his muscles as he continued, his confession spilling out in the privacy of their shared space. First shot took my leg, clean through, felt like a hot poker. Second one. His jaw tightened further, the tendons in his neck standing out. That one took everything I thought my future would be. Shattered the L1 vertebra and clipped the spinal cord. I remember counting the seconds before my legs went numb. The water lapped quietly against the pool's tiled edges as June absorbed his words, understanding the enormous trust behind this revelation. The weight of her own secrets pressed against her chest with renewed urgency. I need to tell you something too, she said, adjusting her grip to better support him as they moved through another series of exercises. About the clinic fire that destroyed my records, about why I recognized Massimo immediately. She told him about recognizing Massimo's distinctive tattoo, the pattern of coincidences that suggested inside involvement in the fire that had destroyed the free clinic where she'd worked, the timing, the targeted destruction of records rather than equipment, the ways it echoed other accidents that had benefited Vescari operations. She held back only the current blackmail threat, unwilling to risk his immediate reaction when they were still establishing this fragile trust. I wanted you to hear it from me, she finished, her voice steady despite the risk she was taking. Before anyone else could use it against us, information is currency here, and I won't let this become someone else's leverage. Calder's jaw flexed, a muscle jumping beneath the skin, but his voice remained steady when he finally spoke. Thank you for bringing this to me directly. Loyalty is measured by timing as much as content. Their therapy continued in loaded silence, the water amplifying every small movement between them. June guided his hips through another series of movements, the water making everything feel both lighter and more intense. The controlled heat between them built with each passing moment, their shared space in the pool becoming charged with unspoken awareness. Something electric that had nothing to do with physical therapy. His breathing changed when she shifted her grip to stabilize a new movement, desire threading through the professional distance they maintained. June felt it too, the magnetic pull that made every touch feel like it could ignite if they allowed it. The water carried the current between them, impossible to ignore. This. Calder's voice was rough, vibrating with restraint as her hands steadied him through a turn. We should address this. What's happening between us? Yes, June agreed, not pretending to misunderstand. Her fingers remained steady despite the electricity coursing through her. But not now. Not with Cesare's threats still hanging over us. Not when either of us could become a vulnerability to the other. After, he said. It wasn't a question, but a certainty, a promise layered with dangerous intent. After, she confirmed, her hands steady on his hips despite the electricity crackling between them like a storm about to break. They finished the session with deliberate focus on form and function, but the awareness hummed beneath every movement, impossible to fully suppress. As they worked, June noticed increased activity among the security team. Subtle shifts in positioning, quiet communications through earpieces, the barely perceptible tension of men preparing for potential threats. Calder was moving pieces on the board, responding to her information with characteristic precision and cold efficiency. She observed guards being reassigned to new posts, caught glimpses of tech teams heading toward the lower levels where the ledger lab was supposedly hidden. Hushed conversations ending abruptly when she approached. She'd only heard whispers about the lab, a secure facility beneath the manor where the syndicate's true records were kept in an encrypted prototype ledger that tracked every shipment, every payment, every favor owed. Now those whispers took on new significance as Calder fortified his defenses, preparing for whatever countermove Cesare might make. At 11:15 that night, after the final security sweep had cleared the perimeter, Calder summoned his quartermaster to the bedroom. "The chair stays in the bedroom safe until morning verification," he ordered, his tone brooking no argument, eyes cold with authority. "No one touches it without my explicit authorization, regardless of clearance level." June watched the wheelchair being secured in the wall safe, then double-checked the safe's lock herself, unable to surrender control of this crucial element of Calder's mobility. Her fingers traced the keypad's edge, memorizing its feel just as she'd done with every other security measure in the house. Knowledge that might mean survival if things went wrong. "All secure," she confirmed, stepping back to maintain professional distance, despite the lingering charge between them from the pool. The acknowledged desire they'd agreed to postpone, but not deny. The day's revelations and unspoken promises hung in the air between them as she gathered her therapy logs. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they'd laid groundwork, both for his physical healing and for the coming confrontation with Cesare that now seemed inevitable. June made her final notes while sitting on her designated couch across the bedroom, recording progress measurements and therapy adjustments with the precision that characterized all her work. The house settled around them, humming with heightened security and the weight of shared secrets. Guards moved with increased vigilance in the hallways, and somewhere below, she knew systems were being fortified. The trust between them had deepened today, through painful truths and acknowledged desire held carefully in check until the right moment. It was a different kind of intimacy, one built on chosen restraint and mutual protection, on promises deferred but not forgotten. As she closed her therapy log, June caught Calder watching her, his gaze holding questions they would answer only when they'd secured their safety, and Cesare could no longer threaten what was beginning to grow between them. The maintenance ticket looked official. Standard form, correct routing numbers, authorized signature. The guard studied it, nodded, and left his post in the housekeeper corridor to escort the repair team to the electrical panel. June was organizing linens when the first jolt hit. The taser's electrodes caught her between the shoulder blades, sending her muscles into instant spasm. Before she could scream, rough hands pulled a hood over her head. The world narrowed to fabric and fear and the sound of her own ragged breathing. They moved fast, professional fast. 2 sets of hands lifted her, and she caught the sharp scent of gun oil before they tossed her into what felt like a van. The vehicle peeled away as June fought to stay conscious, counting turns through the fog of pain. When awareness returned fully, she was zip-tied to a chair in what smelled like a warehouse office. The hood came off, and she blinked against harsh fluorescent light. Diesel, fumes, and salt air seeped through the walls. They were near the docks. Ms. Calloway. The man standing before her had Calder's height, but none of his restraint. Cesare Vascari smiled like a game show host about to reveal a prize. "I apologize for the rough transport, but time is rather pressing." June tested the zip ties. No give. "What do you want?" "Direct." "I like that." Cesare perched on the edge of a metal desk. "What I want is simple. The prototype ledger, hidden in my dear brother's chair, and your signature on some route reassignment papers." "I don't have access to either of those things." "Oh, but you do." He produced a tablet showing camera footage of June working with Calder's chair. "You have his trust, his codes, his routines, and soon you'll have a choice. Help me acquire what's mine by right, or..." He let the threat hang. At the manor, Calder's phone lit up with an incoming video call. The screen showed June bound to a chair, Cesare's hand resting possessively on her shoulder. "Brother," Cesare's voice dripped false warmth. "I believe I have something of yours." Calder's face remained impassive, but his knuckles whitened on his armrests. His captains shifted uneasily behind him as Cesare laid out his demands. "The ledger and the routes, or your pretty therapist starts losing pieces." Cesare squeezed June's shoulder. "I'm sure you can find another professional to handle your special needs." For 3 heartbeats, silence filled the study. Then Calder spoke, his voice arctic. "Set the meat. I'll bring what you want." His captains erupted in protest. They couldn't surrender the routes. The ledger was their security. This woman wasn't worth the empire. Calder silenced them with a raised hand. "At 2,000 hours, I want every shell company hiding Cesare's money detonated on public record." He keyed commands into his phone. "Broadcast the transfers. Let everyone see where the clinic fire funding came from." "Sir," one captain started. "I choose her." Calder's tone ended all argument. Now get me tactical layouts of every shipyard within an hour's drive. I want sightlines, access points, and structural weak spots. The next hours passed in careful preparation. Calder had his chair modified, installing a custom compartment beneath the footplate to house a collapsible rifle. His men seeded the chosen shipyard with overlapping fields of fire, accounting for his limited mobility by mapping every ramp and grating where his chair could maneuver. In the warehouse office, June watched Cesare pace and plan. She counted 3 armed guards, noted their positions relative to the single exit. A loading crane loomed outside the window, its hook swaying in the rising storm wind. The metal arm could become a weapon if she got free. One good swing could take out anyone in its path. Thunder rolled across the water as darkness fell. Cesare checked his watch and smiled. "Time to go, Miss Calloway. Let's reunite you with my brother." The storm intensified as vehicles converged on the shipyard. Rain hammered the metal roofs and wind howled through the stacked containers. Security lights cast weird shadows across the wet pavement. June stumbled as her captors pushed her toward the exchange point. Her clothes were soaked instantly, hair plastered to her face. Through the curtain of rain, she saw Calder's chair approaching, the soft hum of its motors barely audible over the storm. He looked exactly as she'd first seen him, impeccably dressed, dangerously controlled. But now she could read the tension in his jaw, the calculation in his eyes, as he surveyed the scene. She knew he was mapping angles, timing responses, preparing for the violence about to erupt. Cesare positioned her deliberately between himself and his brother. Dramatic weather for a family reunion, isn't it? Lightning flashed, illuminating the yard in stark white. In that frozen instant, June saw everything with crystal clarity. The guards' positions, Calder's finger resting near his chair's hidden compartment, the crane hook swinging wild in the wind. Thunder crashed overhead as Calder's chair hummed forward over the wet metal decking. Rain streamed down his face, but his eyes never left June's. In them she read both apology and promise. He would get her out of this, whatever the cost. The storm's fury matched the tension crackling between the brothers as Calder approached the exchange point. Metal creaked and groaned around them, the shipyard's skeleton protesting nature's assault. But even over the tempest's roar, June heard the soft whir of Calder's chair, advancing with inexorable purpose toward whatever end awaited them all. The shipyard's floodlights snapped on, harsh white beams cutting through sheets of rain. Calder's chair hummed forward, water streaming off his immaculate suit. His voice carried across the wet metal decking, sharp as a blade. "The signature, as requested." He held up a folder, letting it catch the light. "Release her first." Cesare's laugh echoed off the containers. "Come now, brother. You know better." June watched Calder's hands, reading the subtle signals she'd learned over their weeks together. His right palm rested near the footplate release, his breathing measured and controlled, like during their sessions. "Very well." Calder's tone went arctic. "On 3. The count never reached 2. In one fluid motion, Calder triggered the compartment, raised the rifle, and fired. The guard nearest June dropped his weapon with a howl, shattered pieces scattering across the deck. Chaos erupted. Gunfire crackled from multiple positions as Calder's hidden team opened up. June dropped and rolled behind a crate, heart hammering. Through the mayhem, she tracked Calder's chair, watching him navigate the pre-mapped paths with lethal precision. A familiar figure materialized from the shadows. Massimo, moving with purpose toward Cesare. He produced what looked like an access key, offering it with a deferential nod. "Sir, the southern routes, as promised." Cesare's triumph lasted seconds. As he reached for the key, Massimo's other hand whipped up, jamming something under his chin. A microphone, June realized, one that had been recording everything. "Tell us again," Massimo growled, "about arranging the warehouse ambush. About funding the clinic fire." June seized her moment. The crane's control panel gleamed in the floodlights just within reach. She lunged, slamming the lever hard. The massive hook swung wide, catching a gunman mid-aim and sending him sprawling. A sharp crack split the air. Calder jerked, red blooming across his ribs. June's medical training took over. She scrambled across the wet deck, staying low, reaching him as he fought to maintain control of the chair. "Pressure, first," she commanded, pressing hard against the wound. "Breathe with me. 4 count in, 6 out, fight the spasm." His jaw clenched, but he matched her rhythm, letting her guide him through the breathing pattern they'd practiced countless times. She scanned the yard, plotting their exit. "There!" She pointed to a stack of containers, creating a natural barricade. "The grating's reinforced there. Your chair can brace against it." Calder nodded tightly, letting her help position his chair. The rain made everything treacherous, but they'd trained for uneven terrain. June supported his core, protecting the wound while he maneuvered into position. A bullet pinged off metal nearby. Calder raised the rifle, squeezing off a precise shot that sent Cesare diving for cover. In that moment, Massimo appeared at June's side, dragging her behind the barricade as more gunfire erupted. Thunder boomed overhead, drowning out the chaos for a heartbeat. In the distance, sirens began to wail. June checked her watch. Right on schedule. Across the city, Cesare's carefully hidden accounts were detonating, their contents spilling onto public ledgers. Your empire's burning, Calder called out, voice carrying despite his injury. Every cent you stole, every murder you ordered, it's all going public. Cesare's enraged roar cut through the storm. More shots, more shouts. June pressed the hemostatic dressing harder against Calder's side, feeling his pulse race under her fingers. His breath hitched, but he kept the rifle steady. Easy, she murmured. Stay with me. Match my count. Through the rain and gun smoke, she glimpsed Cesare staggering toward a waiting vehicle, one hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder. His face was a mask of fury as he half fell into the car. I won't leave, June whispered fiercely, maintaining pressure on Calder's wound. Not now, not ever. His free hand found hers, squeezing once. Around them, the storm raged on. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the aftermath of their violent reunion, scattered weapons, blood-stained metal, the crane's hook still swaying like a pendulum marking time. Massimo keyed his radio, calling in their position. June focused. On Calder's breathing, on the steady thrum of his pulse beneath her hands. She'd promised to heal what could be healed. Tonight had shattered some things and mended others, but her promise remained unchanged. The hemostatic compounds did their work, slowing the bleeding. June monitored Calder's color, his respiration, the minute tremors that warned of an impending muscle spasm. The rain kept falling, but she barely felt it anymore. Her world had narrowed to this, the pressure of her hands, the rhythm of their shared breath, and the unspoken things passing between them as sirens wailed in the distance. Through the downpour, emergency lights began to strobe. The first responders would find a crime scene washed partially clean by the storm, but the digital evidence was beyond nature's reach. Somewhere in the city, Cesare's carefully constructed shadows were dissolving in the harsh light of exposure. June adjusted the dressing, her touch gentle but firm. Calder's breathing stayed steady, synchronized with hers just as they'd practiced in quieter moments. Despite the chaos around them, despite the pain she knew he was fighting, his eyes remained locked on the direction his brother had fled, as if already calculating the next move in their deadly game. The warehouse loft smelled of salt air and old metal. Through grimy windows, the city's pre-dawn glow cast long shadows across stacked crates and abandoned machinery. June's makeshift medical station occupied one corner, sterile supplies arranged with precise care on a folding table beside a low mattress. Hold still, she murmured, peeling back the blood-stained dressing from Calder's side. The bullet had carved a deep furrow across his ribs, angry and red but clean. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, irrigating the wound while monitoring his breathing for signs of increasing pain. No sedatives, he said again when she reached for the medical kit. I know. She met his eyes. You need to stay sharp, but you also need to let me do this properly. The warehouse creaked around them as his security team patrolled the perimeter. Somewhere in the city, news stations were starting to pick up the story of mysteriously collapsed offshore accounts. Phones buzzed with updates from police contacts advising them to stay dark for the next 3 days. June guided Calder through the transfer from chair to mattress, supporting his core while protecting the injured side. Months of therapy had taught them this dance, the precise angle needed, the way his muscles compensated, how to move as one unit to prevent tissue damage. Thank you, he whispered once he was settled. The words carried a weight beyond simple gratitude. They sounded like walls coming down. June finished securing the fresh bandage, then sat beside him on the mattress. In the dim light, his face held shadows she'd never seen before, vulnerability warring with his need for control. Talk to me, she said softly. He was quiet for a long moment, watching her hands as they checked his pulse. I built everything around being untouchable, he finally said. The chair became another kind of armor. Virginity became proof I couldn't be manipulated through desire. And now you're here, his voice roughened, making me feel things I never thought possible. June's fingers stilled on his wrist. We don't have to do anything you're not ready for. That's just it. He caught her hand, thumb brushing her palm. For the first time, I want to choose this. Not because I'm afraid, not because I'm trying to prove something, because it's you." The air between them shifted, charged with possibility. June leaned closer, giving him time to withdraw if he needed. "One rule," she said. "Whatever happens, we both choose it. No pressure, no guilt, no rushing past limits we've worked so hard to understand." "Agreed." His free hand came up to cup her cheek. Dawn began seeping through the wooden slats, painting stripes of gold across the mattress. June moved with careful deliberation, letting Calder set the pace as they crossed the line they'd drawn months ago. Every touch built on their therapy work, the positioning they'd practiced, the breathing techniques that prevented muscle spasms, the clear communication they'd established. When their lips finally met, it felt like completion rather than beginning. June kept her movements smooth and controlled, mindful of his injury while helping him explore sensations that were entirely new. They took their time, learning each other's responses with the same patience they'd applied to rehabilitation. Calder's hands trembled slightly as they mapped her skin, but his eyes held absolute certainty. This wasn't surrender to weakness, it was choosing to be strong in a different way. June guided him through each new sensation, narrating her touches just as she had during therapy, letting him maintain the control he needed while discovering pleasure he'd denied himself. The sunlight grew stronger as they moved together, finding their rhythm. June watched in wonder as Calder's iron control transformed into something else. Not breaking, but softening, allowing joy to replace fear. When they finally joined, it was with the same precision and care they'd built over months of work, honoring every limit while celebrating every victory. Afterward, June rested her head on his uninjured side, listening to his heartbeat steady. His fingers carded through her hair, touch gentle but sure. "Stay," he said softly. "Not an order, but a request." She propped herself up to look at him. "I need to do something first." She explained her plan to lay a trail for Cesare, one that would draw him exactly where they wanted him. "Massimo and the quartermaster know the timing. You'll be able to track my movements." "Be careful," he said, understanding in his eyes. This wasn't her running. This was her fighting for them both. June dressed efficiently, checking Calder's bandage once more time and ensuring he had everything needed within reach. She set up his secure tablet so he could monitor both her progress and the continuing fallout from Cesare's exposed accounts. The loft had grown warm in the midday sun. June paused at the door, committing to memory the sight of Calder propped against the pillows, his usual rigid posture relaxed but alert. The man who'd hired her to clean blood from marble now trusted her with his body, his heart, and his empire's future. "I'll be back before sunset," she promised, checking her phone's encrypted channel. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I know." June slipped out into the stairwell, her steps purposeful. She had a trail to lay, a trap to set, and a future to claim. Behind her, through the heavy door, she could hear Calder already coordinating with his team, his voice strong and certain. They had crossed their line together, and now they would face whatever came next the same way, by choice, not fear. The social club's grand ballroom reeked of cigars and desperation. June stood on the marble dais, wrists bound but mind clear, watching Cesare parade before Tampa's criminal elite like a carnival barker, the hidden microphone pressed against her ribs, recording every damning word. "The Viscari Empire, gentlemen," Cesare announced, gesturing broadly. "Roots, contracts, debts, all available to the highest bidder." He grabbed June's chin. "Along with this lovely leverage point who's caused my dear brother such distraction." June kept her face blank, counting seconds. The broadcast delay would trigger in exactly 17 minutes, flooding every criminal network with proof of Cesare's betrayals. She only had to keep him talking. "Tell them how you arranged the warehouse ambush," she said clearly, "the one that crippled your own brother." Cesare's hand tightened painfully. "Careful, little nurse. You're not as valuable alive as dead." The emergency lights flickered once, the only warning before darkness slammed down. June dropped instantly, remembering Calder's instructions about thermal imaging. In the chaos of shouts and scraping chairs, she heard the whisper, quiet hum of his modified chair. A single shot cracked through the dark. June felt the chain binding her wrists go slack, precisely severed. She rose smoothly, pulling the microphone free. "Marco DeLuca," she began reading from memory, voice carrying across the panicked room. "Shot outside his daughter's school on March 12th. Payment traced to Viscari Shell Company Delta 847, authorized by Cesare." "Shut her up!" Cesare screamed. "Elena Rossi, clinic administrator, died in arson fire May 3rd, Funds routed through Cayman account 99823, controlled by Cesare Vescari. Another shot illuminated the room for a split second. Calder, neutralizing a guard, rushing the dais. June continued, each name another nail in Cesare's coffin. Antonio Ferraro, Maria Santos, William Chen. She could hear phones buzzing as the broadcast went live, spreading proof of Cesare's crimes across every criminal network in Florida. "You're dead!" Cesare lunged for the dais, but Massimo appeared from the shadows, tackling him with brutal efficiency. They crashed into an ornate table, sending crystal glasses shattering. Through the night vision scope mounted on his chair, Calder watched his half-brother reach for the ceramic blade hidden in his sleeve. His breath remained steady despite the burning pain in his side. One last necessary shot. The muzzle flash lit the room like lightning. Cesare's body went slack in Massimo's grip as thunder rolled outside, nature itself acknowledging the end of a war. "Clear the room," Calder ordered, voice cutting through the chaos. 30 seconds. June stepped carefully down from the dais as bodies rushed past her toward preset escape routes. She moved to Calder's side, hands automatically checking his bandaged ribs. "I'm fine," he murmured, though his jaw was tight with pain. "We need to move." Distant sirens pierced the rain. Massimo appeared at June's elbow, guiding them toward a service corridor while the last stragglers fled through other exits. "Cars are in position," he reported. "Clean routes mapped." They moved swiftly through the narrow hallway, June's hand on Calder's chair, more for connection than assistance. The chair's motor hummed quietly as they navigated around stored furniture and boxes. Rain drummed against the metal door at the corridor's end. June pushed it open, letting in a rush of clean air that swept away the ballroom's lingering smoke and corruption. For the first time in months, they could breathe without looking over their shoulders. Calder's hand found hers in the darkness. "Ready." June squeezed his fingers, feeling the strength in his grip. "Ready." They emerged into the downpour, leaving behind the weight of threats and shadows. Thunder crashed overhead as they moved toward the waiting vehicle, but neither flinched. They had faced worse storms together and emerged stronger. Massimo efficiently loaded the chair, while June helped Calder transfer to the SUV's modified seat. Rain plastered her hair to her face, but she couldn't stop smiling. The hunt was over. They had won. The sirens grew closer as Massimo slid behind the wheel. June settled next to Calder, automatically checking his pulse and breathing. His hand caught hers, stilling her medical instincts. "We're free," he said softly. The SUV pulled away from the curb, windshield wipers beating a steady rhythm. Behind them, red and blue lights began to paint the wet streets, but they were already turning onto their planned escape route, becoming just another vehicle in the rainy night. June watched the social club disappear in the side mirror, along with all the fear and pain it represented. Calder's thumb traced circles on her palm, his touch grounding them both in the present moment. The rain continued to fall, washing away the last traces of Cesare's reign. They had crossed through fire and shadow to reach this point and emerged with something precious: trust forged in crisis, love tempered by pain, and a future entirely their own. Massimo navigated the quiet streets with practiced ease, following one of dozens of predetermined routes that would take them to safety. The city lights blurred through the rain-streaked windows, creating halos of color in the gathering dusk. June leaned her head against Calder's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. They had time now. Time to heal, to build, to simply be together without the pressure of survival. The thought made her smile despite her exhaustion. The SUV turned onto an empty stretch of coastal road, and the last echoes of sirens faded into the sound of rain and sea. They were free, unhunted, at last, with nothing ahead but open road and possibility. Morning light streamed through the coastal manor's floor-to-ceiling windows, transforming the once fortress into something alive and welcoming. The renovation had stripped away the shadows, replacing bulletproof glass with smart-tinted panels and widening every doorway to accommodate Calder's chair with room to spare. In the new therapy wing, June adjusted a patient's ankle alignment while monitoring his gait on the parallel bars. "Good control," she encouraged, making notes on her tablet. 2 more steps, then rest. Down the hall, Calder completed his morning routine in the standing frame, the new gel insert preventing the pressure points that had plagued him 3 months ago. His movements were stronger now, more controlled, evidence of countless hours of dedicated work. "Your numbers are improving," his physical therapist reported, checking the readouts. "Another 5 minutes, then we'll transition to seated core work." The manor breathed differently these days. Instead of armed guards, medical professionals moved efficiently through the halls. The basement vault had been converted to secure patient record storage. Even the kitchen had been redesigned with lower counters and pull-out workstations that allowed Calder to cook alongside June when they had quiet evenings together. After his session, Calder rolled into his office, now adjacent to the clinic's intake area, and reviewed the morning's paperwork. Legal businesses dominated the ledgers: the rehabilitation center, a security consulting firm, property management. The shadow empire had contracted to its cleanest core, stronger for being smaller. "Your 10 o'clock is here," June said from the doorway. "Army veteran, looking for weapons training without complications." She handed him the intake file, then smiled. "And lunch after." "Perfect." Calder's voice was warmer these days, though no less precise. The morning passed in productive rhythm. June managed clinic flow, while Calder worked with the veteran on the redesigned range, demonstrating modified grips and positioning that accounted for various mobility challenges. His expertise commanded respect without requiring fear. They ate lunch on the terrace, the ocean breeze carrying away the last hints of gunpowder. June watched Calder navigate the outdoor space with practiced ease, the chair's wheels finding purchase on carefully graded paths. "I have something for you," she said, reaching into her clinic coat. The envelope was plain white, unremarkable except for what it contained. Calder opened it with steady hands. The sonogram fluttered into his palm like a promise fulfilled. His breath caught as he registered what he was seeing: 2 distinct shapes, 2 beating hearts. "Twins," June whispered, voice thick with emotion. Without speaking, Calder moved to the parallel bars they had installed on the terrace. June watched as he braced himself, muscles engaging in the sequence they'd practiced hundreds of times. With controlled strength, he pushed up, locked his braces, and carefully lowered himself to one knee, his forehead pressed against her belly, hands trembling slightly as they framed her hips. "I swear by name and house," he murmured, the formal words carrying the weight of absolute truth. "They will have a world worth inheriting." The sunset ceremony was intimate, just their closest circle gathered on the terrace. June wore a simple white dress, Calder a perfectly tailored suit. They exchanged vows with the ocean as witness, gold rings replacing the weight of weapons. Massimo stood as best man, his loyalty now bound by choice rather than fear. The clinic staff mingled easily with the remaining security team, all of them part of this reformed family. Later, in the newly finished nursery, Calder practiced transfers with the crib rail, while June updated patient files on her tablet. The room smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings, pale green walls, soft rugs, and furniture arranged for maximum accessibility. The morning clinic schedule is full, June noted, making adjustments to accommodate their growing patient list. The veterans program is gaining reputation. "Good," Calder replied, executing another careful transfer. "Legitimate work feels different, better." The clinic's quiet hum drifted up from below, a reminder of how much had changed. The security system still ran with military precision, but now it protected healing rather than secrets. The weapons remained, but they'd been redistributed. Some to trusted veterans programs, others secured in safes that rarely needed opening. June set aside her tablet and moved to help Calder adjust his position. His hands found her waist, drawing her close in the nursery's soft lamplight. The strength in his grip was familiar but gentled now, protective rather than possessive. "I'm still dangerous," he murmured against her hair, "to anyone who would threaten this peace we've built, but never to you, never to them." June placed her hand over his heart, feeling its steady rhythm. "I know," she said simply, because she did. The man who had once ruled, through fear, now commanded respect through competence and care. The fortress had become a sanctuary. Outside, waves whispered against the shore. Inside, the house settled into its new purpose. Not a stronghold against enemies, but a shelter for healing, growth, and the future they'd fought to claim. The peace they'd won felt solid, earned through sacrifice and sealed with love. They stood together in the soft light, surrounded by the promise of tomorrow. The nursery would soon echo with new life. The clinic would continue to help those seeking legitimate paths forward, and their reformed world would keep expanding in careful, measured steps, just like every other victory they'd achieved together.